And Chris from McGill is going to take a stab at drafting some stuff that we'll likely take back to planning board in April for more discussion. My hope is to be back with council possibly in April. Actually, it would be, if we're having the next conversation with planning board in April, we'll probably be back with you guys in May for a next update on this. I don't know yet. I like to hope that we'll be back in front of you with recommendations in May and then can set public hearing for June. This is not on a deadline. The moratorium that we have in place on development in the floodplain lasts till December. We set it at 12 months to give ourselves time. I've not been, inundated with calls about development in the floodplain. There's like one that comes to mind where I think the person is waiting to see the direction on which way we go. That's not yelling or stomping about that. In a nutshell, there's kind of the low-hanging fruit, the easy, if there is an easy part of this conversation, and then there's the harder discussions. Just on the surface, the easy part of the discussion seems to be centered around the elevation requirements. We currently require new development to be elevated 3 feet above the base flood elevation, which, believe it or not, outside of coastal zones, which are a different beast, it's already a higher standard than the state model ordinance and higher than FEMA's ordinance, 3 feet above the base flood elevation. We did see quite a few examples of development that I've permitted over the years that met that freeboard 3 feet above base flood elevation that still had water in it. It just tends to be kind of an agonizing conversation about this higher standard, but adding to the costs of development and the line that you draw to figure out that delicate balance. As of where we left things with the planning board, there seemed to be a direction on just leaving alone the freeboard requirement at 3 feet above base flood elevation for non-residential construction, with the thought that we may recommend 4 feet elevation for residential development. And the thought being, and they're very carefully weighing out different considerations, is that in a residential setting, you've got people sleeping in the middle of the night. Just that extra elevation requirement could, protect lives in the night, whereas commercial development, industrial development, you're adding to their construction costs significantly, but you're not likely to have situations where people won't know the storm is coming and then be able to not be at work that night or to get out of work if it's coming, the way when people are sleeping and then all of a sudden wake up to flooding. So we had been talking about 4 or 5 feet of elevation, or 4 or 5 feet. It seems to be heading towards 4 feet. The state floodplain coordinator told me, I was chatting with him informally on the phone a few weeks ago, he believes the highest standard in the state outside the coastal areas is already 4 feet. When you think about some of the houses we've permitted that are at 3 feet above base flood elevation, you get the grade elevation at ground level, and in a lot of cases is often 2 or 3 feet below. So you're already working with really tall crawl spaces. And then you start going, so I've got some houses that are about a 6 foot tall crawl space. It's taller than me. So going that 5 feet, it's like you're almost at the level where you might as well have like beach houses. But anyway, it's kind of an arbitrary line that you draw, because there's just no guarantee that in any given storm that you're not going to get flooded, whatever the elevation requirement is. So there's sensitivity to cost, sensitivity to life safety. So that's where things are headed, is a slight higher standard for residential, which from what Steve Garrett, the floodplain coordinator for the state, thinks would match the highest standard in the state outside a coastal zone.
And then commercial at this
Leave alone at 3 feet.
and we're only talking 1 foot up on the residential. So
Question real quick.
Sure.
At this point in time, after Helene, has anybody, so went down Thorncrest Drive, talking to a couple of the residents there. Last drop of rain hit, they had no water in their house. It wasn't until a little bit after, when they were standing there oohing and ahhing over the siding being gone, that there was a gush of water that, and within just several minutes, they stood in the roadway and watched their houses fill 2 feet of water. My question is, has anybody done any kind of study to determine what caused that? I'm sure it was a log jam somewhere or something that may have created something more like a dam that broke.
Yeah, not that I know of. We have to keep in mind the vast majority of Cane Creek is on up in
Yeah.
Buncombe. I've seen, a WLOS report, one day they were, they've been doing these retrospectives on issues in this place, that place. I saw something on Fairview, and it showed like a drone footage of Cane Creek where it had forked
I drove
out,
it Saturday.
cut separate channels. I mean, I don't know, but it obviously was some lag where, the rush of water was coming along Cane Creek, and that's what happened. I've been hearing the same story about that.
But I look at it as, we've never seen water in South Chase before. Something had to generate that.
That's true, but again, I want to point out, whatever happened, it was the 500 to 1,000 year storm. I've talked to a number of folks there, and it is interesting, in the current floodplain maps, the edge of the 100-year floodplain, I don't like to call it that, it's officially the 1% floodplain, which means there's a 1% chance of a 100-year storm in any given calendar year. The floodplain map shows that back edge of the floodplain, it's almost a straight line going along the back of those properties where the houses are theoretically just outside it. I did look at the old 1982 maps, which obviously predated South Chase. There was a bubble of floodplain in there. Now, granted, one thing, the mapping technology got better, but also the fact that that straight line was there, and I know this was before we were in the floodplain program.
Right.
Windsor-Autry did some fill work back there, and it probably was a case where they were in the floodplain in 1982, and then by 2007, based on what Windsor-Autry had done. And they did similar later in Livingston Farms. They just went about the more official process of doing a LOMAR F, a letter of map revision based on fill. So again, and this kind of segues into that, where do you draw the line on regulation? Because you're talking about the 500 or 1,000 year storm. If there was such a thing as the 1,000-year floodplain map, they would have definitely been in it. It's not to discount what they've been through, but again, it's a slippery slope of where you draw that line. So, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But the next quote easy thing that we were talking about doing was that notion of trying to identify and prohibit a few additional uses from floodplains. And the current vein of conversation seems to be completely, and this is my recommendation, and take it or leave it, is, that the question lurking from that Senate Bill 382 that was a hurricane relief bill. It was on the news, featured heavily for all kinds of controversial things that dealt with, like, stuff snuck into the bills, stripping power from this party or that party. But there was a very little paragraph in there about downzoning. And what it did is not just an official rezoning down to like M1 down to residential, but just it can be a de facto downzoning by removing permitted uses from a particular zoning district or lowering density allowances. I don't know the origin of it, but I can only speculate it was at a lobby of, I don't know who would have lobbied for it, but it got put in there. My thought is, because it is such a new, fresh thing. We are a small town. If it gets challenged, it's going to be probably in a Charlotte or a Raleigh or a Greensboro at a certain point. And I never say never, but my thought is that we decide what we want for our floodplain ordinance and push forward. And if we get challenged later, then we re-amend or, see if we have a leg to stand on with regard to fighting it in court. So, because there just seemed to be, I was asking very early on questions of the School of Government, listening in a webinar, and it's just so new. There was no clear direction on, this absolutely applies to the floodplain ordinance. or this does not apply to your floodplain ordinance. There's all this, well, if your floodplain ordinance is part of a unified code, then it might apply. And it's just, we need to decide what we want to do. And so the direction that things are moving are doing things like making sure we're clear about prohibiting multifamily in floodplains because of the density. The higher concentration of units there means more cars destroyed, more people evacuated. Schools. Fernleaf is a prime example. They are going to be rebuilding in accordance with the guidelines because they're safe, but we don't necessarily want to encourage another school in the floodplain. Daycares, nursing homes, senior adult assisted living. I think that's it. There's already a prohibition on critical facilities, things like police, fire, rescue, and floodplains, and then there's this list of hazardous type situations that are not allowed, hazardous waste, fuel storage. There was a grandfathered propane farm, two of them side by side next to the Blue Barn property. The one in the floodway that was hit the hardest, my understanding, is being decommissioned, so it will not be back.
And there was tanks all over the place.
Everywhere.
on that,
Yeah.
So,
The one in the flood fringe is remaining, not much we can do about that, but that's already clear that if that had been raw vacant land since the floodplain ordinance, it would not have been permitted, and we won't permit another one. So anyway, we're going to bring probably recommendations on prohibiting those few uses. Now, as I pointed out to the planning board, and I'll point out to you guys, that a lot of this, they seem, really important. It is very important, but if you look at our zoning map, and when I get in front of you with our recommendations, I'll have copies of our zoning map and our floodplain maps for you. The way Fletcher is zoned currently, a lot of what we're talking about is going to be moot because the floodplain flows through mostly, if you start out on the edge, out in the Hoopers Creek, it starts in a single family district. It flows into the industrial district where we don't allow some of these, uses we're talking about prohibiting. It flows into the town center, which, we will get to a conversation eventually about. And it can't be a large part of this conversation because we can't write the rules just with the thought of the town property in mind, but it will have some bearing on what we decide or what developers wish to do someday with our property. Flows back through residential zoning. The Meritor property technically is zoned R1. It'll probably never be developed for anything other than recreation someday. And then on off under 26, you go out into the Broadmoor and exits our jurisdiction. So a lot of what we're doing is almost like symbolic. It's taking a stance saying we're not going to allow it. It's not to say we won't have more areas identified or studied as floodplains someday. Right now we have Hoopers Creek, Cane Creek, Higgins Creek, and Kimsey Creek are the only identified floodplains. But we have little blue lines running all over town that have never been studied by the floodplain mapping program. So it's just important to get it in the books if that's the direction we want to go. Now, where things become murky, there are more progressive floodplain regulations that are rare. You do hear, the Henderson County does have limits on fill. That was a long conversation with the board. It seems fairly arbitrary as far as pulling a number out of the air. Like Henderson County says you can only limit 20% of your floodplain. Now, from what I'm understanding from Toby, is they do have a process, I don't think it's been utilized, but they do have a process where someone can request a special fill permit, and if it gets approved, they can do more than that. But after a lot of discussion about limits on fill, conversation turned more to the concept of no adverse impact, which is becoming more prevalent in some places, not very many places. Brevard, which Chris Brown is studying Brevard's regulation, they have put in some no adverse impact stuff that I don't know if it's voluntary, but the gist is that when a developer comes to you seeking development in the floodplain, you're basically telling their engineer that, well, you have to do this big, expensive flood study and then, be able to certify that that development is going to have no adverse impact
Downstream.
whether it's
Adjacent.
downstream or upstream or
Yep.
however. And I'm not an engineer, this is where my ability to talk intelligently ends, and we'll eventually have McGill in front of you guys too that can hopefully answer these questions. And I think even the engineers sometimes are, I don't know, or it's not clear direction because it's not a widely used management practice, is where do you draw the line? How do you say no adverse impact, 4 properties down, all the way down to where, say, the Cane Creek dumps into the French Broad River? I mean, where do you draw the line on the no adverse impact? Like what are the parameters and how do you quantify? There was discussion on whether or not you at least make them do the study just so that it's there, but not necessarily make them, not permit development just because it's decided that it has an adverse impact, but to get it on record. That seems precarious. I don't know. And where is ultimately, there is the notion of wanting to protect floodplain, but it seems like the properties that are going to be most helped by no adverse impact standards are going to be people that are already in the floodplain to begin with. So it's that same concept when we talk about, just development in general, and folks are like, oh, the traffic, or oh, the stormwater. It's like, they want to be the last ones in and slam down the gate. And as small as we are with as little developable land as we have, the biggest impact we would have would be in our industrial zone, where we do have some developable tracts in floodplains, and you can imagine, say, the partnerships for economic development's perspective, if all of a sudden we render, that's the question too, if we render property unbuildable because of our floodplain guidelines, what do you do, rezone to single-family zoning right in the middle of the industrial district? It's a big conundrum, I think. So
And Aaron, and if I can just weigh in for a second, all these things, depending on what you seem is reasonable, maybe reasonable things to add, like, the raising the height limit, freeboard limits, restricting those uses. But if you do all of those things, practically speaking, you're eliminating so many things that are development possibilities. If you go to the extent of, okay, you have to raise the height of the residential structure, and you have to do a no adverse impact, I mean, are you going to be eliminating all possibilities for development in the floodplain just to satisfy that kind of reassurance that it's minimizing, when in the scheme of things, does that one project have so much of an impact downstream? Some people are going to argue anything does, and it's worth making.
Well, I watched the county discussion when they went through this last year. Several engineers came forward and said, and I've seen it from an emergency services standpoint, in places where there wasn't fill, where there was fill added, water rose quicker, water moved faster because you're compressing. You take a Mills River, there's plenty of agricultural ground for that water to spread out and meander around versus a back cave Girton where there's nothing but a cavern where it's compressed, so it raises quicker, and when it raises quicker, it runs stronger and it creates more damage. So I'm a firm believer that anytime you put any kind of fill in, you're going to adversely affect somebody, because where that water used to go, it can't go anymore. So it's going to push it somewhere, and that's what I'm curious to find out.
I will mention too, one thing, and I'll mention it again when we have everybody together, is that there was some confusion the night we were talking about planning board, because there was some confusion over what the county was doing, because it was mentioned that the county had just said, okay, we want zero fill in the floodplain. And I stopped at that and was like, it doesn't sound right, but I didn't argue the point. I later then found out from Toby, the floodplain manager for the county, that they were looking at going back to zero floodplain in the flood, or zero fill in the floodway.
Right.
Which
That
we
makes
already
sense.
have a zero fill
Yep.
in the floodway, and we don't allow most development in the floodway, period.
And just
I didn't realize the county had a 20% of provision that allowed 20% of their floodway to be filled.
And Amber, for your, excuse me, just for your benefit, and you may already know this, so stop me, so when we talk about the floodplain, we'll sometimes talk about flood fringe, which is not quite as low or dangerous for flooding versus the floodway part of the floodplain, which is worse. And we got-
Floodway is generally like the areas closest to the creek. Flood fringe gets into, it varies in width. You know, if you look at Cane Creek, it has a fairly wide 100-year floodplain, which oftentimes the floodway is maybe about, maybe 25 to 50% of the totality of the whole 100-year floodplain. Versus if you have like something like Little Narrow Higgins Creek or Kimsey Creeks, which on a nice peaceful day in a drought, the creeks may be, 3 or 4 feet wide, although that's been changed by the storm because of all the erosion. Some of these have really changed, but if you look at the mapped floodplain, it's this very narrow ribbon running down the map. And I was frankly surprised. As much nuisance flooding as we've heard over the years from, say, Wildwood Garden, the aftermath of the storm in there, I mean, I'm discounting the fact that they did have a couple of private bridges wash out, but as far as the homes themselves, like, the day after the storm, I was imagining driving around Fletcher thinking, oh God, what's gonna be gone? But it really didn't appear much different in Wildwood Gardens after Helene than it did. And the only thing I can attribute to that is such a narrow channel and the headwaters not very far upstream. So yes, they get they're at the bottom of the bowl. But it's nothing like the floodplain from Cane Creek or Cooper's Creek.
Cooper's Creek, yeah.
So that's generally where we're at. McGill Planning Board was very interested to learn more about no adverse impact. When I briefed Mark the next day, that was, when we've been talking with him, it's so hard because you do have to look at all angles. I mean, we're hearing there are gonna be parties that, we're still hearing from that are concerned about, you hear the instant blame for, oh, my house flooded because you allowed this up there.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not an engineer, but it's like, okay, like take the Steelcase building, like there was a party inside the old Steelcase building that got hit hard and is no longer in business. Half the Steelcase building is already in the 100-year floodplain, and so you figure if we had the 1,000-year storm, you might as well take the rest of it. The entire Steelcase building was about 2 or 3 feet underwater.
Yep.
So maybe they had an extra inch or two, but there were parties that looked at Minetti next door and decided that, oh, Minetti caused our flooding. Or the developer that built that building built it on spec, not knowing who was going there, but it was a mountain of, 7 feet of fill dirt, and it was sold off by the party that owns the Fletcher Business Park anyway. So, and again, it's a tract and that's the thing. Do you basically, in essence, kill economic development? Not to mention that if you render some of those parcels unbuildable, we're going to end up in court and possibly lose if our restrictions. Now, that's no consolation to the folks that are, instant engineers after an event like we have that think, oh, that storm caused my flooding down here in Thorncrest. Because I've had questions about Minetti, Copart, and this one here, because the parties that are like, oh, you're not letting that go forward now, are you? And it's like, well, they were already permitted, and there are the developer of the residential right next to us is looking at elevating voluntarily some of their units that were going to be in the floodplain based on what happened in the apartment complex next to the park. Now, the only residential in the floodplain on this development, I believe, was the single-family component, so that's good, and it's not as dense. But again, so that's just kind of, I'll pause there, and we can circle back to this.
I mean, this is gonna-
And I weigh in on it just as a cautionary tale. If you go full bore, when I'm saying full bore, no fill, no adverse impact, all these prohibited uses, raise the freeboard requirement for residential, you could in essence be shutting down any possibility of
Yeah.
any development in the floodplain. And I think that can't happen without a lot of adverse impact to people downstream. I've been here a long time, done this a long time. Eric and I, if we had, a nickel for every person who said, it's flooded because Ingalls was allowed to be built so many years ago, it becomes to be a little bit of a stretch to attach
Yeah.
blame to that, so.
It's just, I think it's just, obviously, just a sensitive topic right now. as
It is, and that's the other
it's
thing
a-
is
It's just a, yeah, and it's,
not to, to take
Yeah.
into account, okay, maybe this is an opportunity to make improvements
Mhm.
to how you regulate the floodplain to protect, all of us here in town. But just to be cautious how far you go with it, because, what we experienced was an extraordinary flood event. So,
and to,
I was-
to,
sorry.
well, I was gonna say, to your
that
point,
we've
Mark.
never seen before.
Yeah, to your point, and again, and this is obviously a sensitive subject, and I don't want to take away anybody's humanity or anything that happened to anybody, but I think there is a fine line to walk in making sure that we're keeping our residents safe while also not killing economic development in town. And so that's, I don't know what that answer is yet, and hopefully.
I don't think and that's what I'm trying to
Maybe
say.
that's not a right answer.
I don't think anybody does. I mean, I've seen
Yeah.
press about Asheville. There's question about whether Asheville's rules were up to the state model ordinance standards. I'm not going to get out, I don't want to be officially saying that Asheville was breaking the rules, but I saw press that was questioning some of the ways that some things got done in Asheville or may get redone. But anyway, it's these conversations are going on everywhere, and I don't think the big cities have it figured out. So, what I will say is, and it'll be totally up to council's discretion, because this is such a technical matter. Again, it was the only agenda item on our planning board meeting in February, and we were 2 hours in it. It's very philosophical and whatnot, and I don't want to overkill, but if we have concise, neat recommendations from planning board by the end, and we can talk about it, we can perhaps do it under normal procedures. But going back, probably before any of y'all's time, there would be an occasion where we would maybe want to have a special work session, like back when we were crafting our land development code, or back when we were looking at the general concept of multifamily. We had a special work session, even had a special joint session with planning board on one occasion. I think by the time we get recommendations from planning board, we'll just need to be amongst ourselves with council.
I think it would be good too. I went to a meeting at Hendersonville, when in Hendersonville, they had a special meeting called to discuss some of their stuff. And they provided some diagram maps, some educational pieces to kind of educate everybody on
Yeah.
what the floodway, what the floodplain is, your different elevations and what the requirements are. And I think that should be part of that piece when we do that, so that everybody understands and has a visual in their mind of what we're talking about when we're.
Yeah, I think that's a good,
Yeah,
like,
it's a-
educational point for the
yeah, it's
public.
good
I
education.
think that's a good
Public and
point,
for
yeah,
us,
yeah.
for everybody, just to
Yeah.
remind,
'Cause I'm not sure everybody.
McGill
because
could
the public
probably do
understands
some
it well,
visuals on
and
this.
I mean, it's complicated.
yeah, it
It's
is.
just, I could see it being like a 2-hour agenda item on,
Yeah.
if we have a full agenda, it might need to be, I don't know if you want it on a separate day or have it in a 4 PM work session.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah, I guess
Yeah.
I'll have to see,
You
yeah.
might want it, because this is a lot to
It is.
digest. It's a lot to discuss, so.
It affects a lot of areas, and I
Yeah.
think just
Yeah.
a good educational piece ahead of time would be.
I'll begin talking to Chris about
Yeah.
Well, first I want to get through planning board recommendations, and then I don't necessarily want to start planning that officially, a date in mind, until we know we're coming out of planning board with the recommendations. The other aspect is that once you start considering draft amendments to the ordinance, keeping in mind that the state has to approve your floodplain ordinance. Now, if we come out of it with any higher standards, Chris is basically making sure that our current ordinance is up to the state model ordinance. So there may be some technical amendments to the code that we're not even talking about, that I'm not even aware of yet, that may just be, yeah, we got to do this because the state says so. And it's been a while since we've updated it. Then anything really deep concepts where we're looking at higher standards, we want to make sure that the state is okay with it. Now, generally, they applaud and are appreciative of higher standards, but then we want to make sure, too, that it's not going to get into, like, maybe they might know that, oh, this is going to violate that Senate bill provision or something.
Right. So who at the state approves it? What organization?
Well, it's North Carolina Emergency Management, the state floodplain mapping program.
So they-
And so ultimately FEMA is in control of the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. They have a model ordinance. Now, that trickles down to the states, and in North Carolina, the NC Emergency Management Division, Department, whatever it is, has the floodplain program for the state.
All right.
And so that's who when I got audited a few years ago, when they were just doing a community visit to make sure our program was up and running, I got audited by one of the folks designated our region from that agency. So they're basically would be looking over our ordinance to make sure it's compliant with theirs and ultimately the
Sure.
model ordinance.
So are they updating the 100-year floodplain map?
On floodplain maps,
Yeah, are they updating floodplain? What's
I
happening
heard
with that?
nothing.
We don't know anything, I mean, excuse me, we don't know anything official, but I've heard comments.
So
from
they had
state
some
officials
representatives.
About doing that, about updating.
So that is coming down the pipeline, maybe?
Call
I think
Hendersonville.
it is. I think in light of what's happened,
Sure.
They had a FEMA rep and a North Carolina rep
Yeah.
at that meeting
Uh-huh.
that talked specifically about where those updates are,
Okay.
where they're not, and how long it's going to be until things are up to date. So they might have a contact.
Yeah. Well, I can very easily ask Steve Garrett where he thinks that we are with our county's floodplain maps. Now, what I know is that when I started here in 2003, we were operating off 1982 floodplain maps. They got updated in 2007, so 2008. And at the time, and every time, they theoretically have a goal. It was stated in many seminars I went to where they want to update each county's floodplain maps every 5 years. So 2008 to 2025 now, when we've not had a new update yet.
Yeah.
I did hear that anecdotal thing so when, I don't know, folks that remember Hurricane Floyd on the eastern part of the state that decimated the eastern counties, a bunch of the eastern North Carolina counties quickly got floodplain maps after Floyd. So the hope is that may happen here. I've also heard comments, though, that, again, as long as they're just mapping the 100-year floodplain, I'm hearing that those aren't necessarily going to change drastically because the floods did
yeah.
Yeah,
follow a general thing. It just went beyond the 100 years.
Right.
sure.
Eric said they were updated in 2000, and I remember that, 2007, 2008.
Somewhere in there.
I think it's important to know, at least from our observations, I don't think people would contradict us on this. When we have had bad floods since that time, they largely follow
Followed
those
those.
lines.
Yeah.
They're pretty darn accurate. So, I mean, do you blow up the flood maps because of what happened with Helene? But it was the much larger storm.
And if you remember, we had Francis and Ivan back to back in 2004.
Yeah, here's another
And
one
so
of
the
our-
2008 floodplain maps didn't change too drastically from the 1982 maps. Now, the technology got a lot better because they're using that LiDAR technology, so they're more refined, I think. And I am curious to know about the next maps because the rivers and creeks changed so much
Yeah,
from
that's-
this storm.
That's what I was curious about. The
Yeah.
topography is just different now.
So to be determined, and I won't find out in my career, I hate to say. So, I mean, I'll be, in 10 years, I'll be on GIS. Well, they haven't done the floodplain maps yet. No, maybe they'll have done one. I'll be on
Let's hope
I
not.
told them so.
Don't hold your breath.
But anyway, so we'll just be, as soon as we get out of April planning board meeting, I'll be able to reset knowing if we have recommendations to bring forward. And once we know that, then I'll be able to start suggesting whether or not we want to target like a date in May, whether it coincides with a council night at 4 PM or a totally separate date at 5 PM, where we just say we're going to have like a workshop where we, talk flood and have a day when we know McGill can come and be a part of it. Because honestly, as I got ready, the closer I got to planning board, the more I realized that I'm not able to guide them on this,
Yeah.
It's like even the engineers are kind of like, this is such and every jurisdiction's trying to figure it out and nobody's got the answer.
I know there'll be hard decisions and a lot of analyzing of what to do, but I think you can feel on the other side of this that you're going to come out with something that will improve things.
Yeah.
So you're likely, I can't say what you're going to approve and what's going to happen, but it will lead to improvements, and we think are additional protections.
I just want to make sure we're doing our due
Life,
diligence, and I think
Yeah.
that's what we're doing now, so.
Yeah, that is what we're doing.
property. Right.
All right, so we'll report back to you in April or May,
Yeah.
probably.
And-
Sounds good.
and
Yeah, thank you.
Related to this, I know in particular, we probably had more questions from residents in South Chase, in particular
Yeah.
Thorncrest.
Thorncrest.
Yeah, it's fair.
Good questions. I know,
Yeah.
Mayor, you had, a pretty substantive email from a resident who lived along there, her home was probably flooded.
Yeah.
There's not a clear-cut answer as far as what other mitigation things can be done right now as relative to Cane Creek, which largely impacted them because it came up so high from Cane Creek. But like Eric pointed out, and I didn't realize, I put the filter on there, when you go in GIS,
layers.
the layer, and you can show the floodplain. It comes up to the back, right to the edge of the backyards of a bunch of homes on Thorncrest. But, all our other bad floods, I don't think it ever even came into their yards. I mean, it was accurate. But this one was so huge, but now with the damage to the streams, or at least debris in the streams, some places the streams appear to be wider, well, not appear to be, they are wider
They are
in some
wider,
places. There is as part of the county's efforts to do debris removal, they're also doing the streams, analyzing it with their contractor, and I think with Debris Tech, which is the monitor. And so Cane Creek should be on that list. I don't know when they're gonna get to it. They're starting with Mud Creek, is my understanding. But they have done some analysis of costs to clear debris. So if they can get more of the tree debris or some other, the other big stuff out of there, that should help with.
Alleviate.
Yeah, with some of the water flow down there. I don't think with some minor storms, you're gonna see anything coming up to South Chase, but if we ever had another really big one, and there's still debris in there that, that could lead to flooding in there.
Yeah, I know riding
So-
Thorncrest, that foliage was so thick, you never could really see the other side. That's not the case anymore,
Right.
because that river took a lot of that foliage out, so when you ride back on Thorncrest, you see how really close.
And I
Much
know
closer
nerves are
than I
raw.
thought.
We got so many questions, just even about, the site where the old gas station got torn down, and that was a couple years ago, we thought it was gonna become a new gas station, and when that fell apart, which was basically because DOT was gonna require them to put a light in at that thing, the developer, the owner, which is a petroleum company down in Mississippi, was gonna put a Dodge stores there, but when that fell apart for them, they just said, well, we're just gonna demolish, and they were waiting for state approval because of the old underground tank situations. And so we get complaints about the blighted nature, when are they gonna tear all that down? And, so it got torn down, and they basically indicated that they were gonna regrade it, get it ready to just market.
Looks good.
And that's where it's at. But I've been getting questions even on that one. That's not a floodplain, but there's been questions about what's going there, thinking that it could exacerbate future flooding. So nerves are very understandably raw down
Yep.
there. So, but we'll bring you back. I'll have a better picture after April planning board meeting, and then we can start figuring out next conversations on it beyond that.
Thank y'all for your work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Water
Eric.
Planning Board.
Thank you, Eric.
All righty, moving on, discussion item number 10, the update on the farmer's market. Mr. Manager.
Yeah, thanks. So I put this back on because I know we hadn't fully decided our location. So, at the meeting last month, I updated you all about the listening session that had been from January, and part of that was to try and determine what day of the week and what time frame, and try and narrow down where to do it, the actual location. So Tuesday, this is a reminder, Tuesdays from 3 to 6 is the time that we're looking. Our Parks and Rec departments puts the application packet guidelines together, so we've kind of got that ready to go. We're bouncing it off of Cooperative Extension folks and that ASAP nonprofit. But I know, there was some discussion. I initially was kind of trying to steer you towards the park, but right now it's back parking lot of Billmore Community Park, or this open area near the green building, I call it, our Parks and Rec maintenance building, and the edge of the south parking lot of Town Hall. So you wanted me to follow up, kind of just analyze those two sites again. I know there's some cost considerations if we have to do auxiliary parking at the back of the park. So we did that and ran some numbers on it, and just to kind of compare quickly, contrast the two. We can do this site here. It is doable. It's fairly visible. It's not hard to get to, and we don't need to spend money to spruce it up. I mean, there may be some places to patch in there. So that can work. I think it could hopefully work well initially, unless we outgrow it. I'm hoping this will move to some other site sometime, or as town center hopefully can get developed further along, that could be in a better location within however the layout is for town center, if we can keep it in here. I think those are really neat when they have them in their downtown area. So that's doable, but then comparing that to the park site in the back parking lot, visible, easy to get to, but very, very busy site. We have a lot of park patrons there, and if we get outside of baseball and lacrosse and other things that are a little more intense in that spring, early summer, it's not too bad outside of that. But when that's going on and everyone else being there, warmer weather, it's tough, and it depends how many vendors we have at the farmer's market, because they're probably going to need about 2 parking spaces per booth.
I think it's with the Britons.
Yeah, and if you do, hopefully we'll get 15 to 20, I'm hoping at least. Could be less, could be more, vendors to start. So that's not too, maybe 40 parking, but that adds up, or 30 parking spaces, plus customers
patrons.
that are coming just there just for that, when that's going on, and then all the other park patrons and activities going on. So let's just assume we'd have to or it would be highly advisable to put that more permanent auxiliary parking down. We ran some numbers on that, and that'd be $18,000 roughly to do that. So, having said all that, and comparing the two, I guess, you know, my recommendation, and it was the top vote getter, I know Trevor brought that up, is we attempt to do this here. And the biggest challenge, and we'll have to come up with a plan, is how we cut off. We can shut the gate here, that's not hard, but from the other side, from Howard Gap, we either right at the road or maybe close it a little further in so people can get in and park. They just can't drive through. So maybe we could have customers parking over there and, you know, on street here, maybe some of the south parking lot parking. So that's where we're heading with this. We still want to get the packet out. You know,
I'm curious to see how many vendors we get.
I am too.
It's,
There's interest in it.
There's interest. I've
There's
heard a
interest.
lot of chatter.
I think we'll get a decent amount. It may not be as many as we think. As people say, I'm interested, and then, you know, they don't do it, or it'll grow a lot. But, I mean, hopefully this will grow and we'll have a really good, solid, I think the potential's definitely there.
Yeah, I think whether it's, you know, at the park or by the Green Building, I mean, both of those locations just have great visibility.
Yeah.
And so I think especially if we're gonna do it at the Green Building, we got some signage, whatever that needs to look like.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We're gonna have quite a bit of people coming through there, because you look at Howard Gap Road on any given day,
Yeah,
between Fernleaf or just people going home or
Yeah.
going to work wherever,
yeah.
a lot of traffic, and there's gonna be a
Yeah.
lot of cars, I bet, end up,
Yeah.
if they learn about it, start
And
pulling in
just
there.
give you some perspective, not that you all don't have a good idea of how much traffic comes down Hendersonville Road here, Highway 25. I mean, it's well over 30,000
Oh,
vehicles a
absolutely,
day. So
absolutely.
there is a lot, that, you know, we'll pull some South Buncombe and then other parts of Henderson County as, you know,
rush hour.
yeah, but customers coming in and vendors too. So
I think
so that's
it'll be
where
busy.
it's leaning. I'll leave it on here for next week because
Yeah. Get with it.
I know Trevor had some input on it, and just, so he's got that in Keith, so they can weigh in, and hopefully then we can kind of close the loop there, and then
Okay.
we'll keep you up to date as packets go out, and hopefully we get good vendor response.
I'm more interested in this, and that's nothing against the park, but I think for Josh and his staff, the amount of stress it's gonna be on emptying out that area of people that pull into the park and
Yeah. That's
a lot of
another
the traffic
logistic thing,
and the
yeah.
walk, you know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
summertime, 3 to 6 is
Yeah.
like peak hour at the park.
Yeah,
anyway.
you'd have to almost in advance cone off
Yeah.
or tape off those areas so people wouldn't park there before. And then, yeah.
And then summertime, you've got.
It's gonna be tough because some
sometime
people
we'll
have
have
been there a
camp.
long time, I don't know.
And I'm
Yeah.
assuming the camp kids are gonna be using
Yeah,
that area down there as
Yeah.
well.
Yes, they do.
Parents coming and going,
Yeah,
picking
yeah.
up and
that's right. They, that's kind of home base is the,
shed.
park, yeah, the
picnic.
park shelter, yeah, so.
I
That's a
will
good
say,
point.
at the focus group, it did seem like the conversation was a bit more nuanced when we were talking about location. I mean, nobody was, if I can recall, just inherently just against the park. And
No.
so that's what I'm kind of curious too. And I think there's a good recommendation. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But it might be worthwhile, and I mentioned this before, to maybe have like a pop-up event at the park just to see the logistics and see how it goes. Maybe it can coincide with an event or something one another, or just a one-off day.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be helpful just to see if the
Yeah.
logistics actually work for it too.
Yeah. Yeah, we could maybe in conjunction with an event, have them as like vendors or, you know, whatever vendors are signed
Yeah.
up. Yeah, I mean, I love the park, because I think there's just so much activity there. And it's a big part of our identity, and, you know, people know it, and, you know, we do have good parking there, although it does get very busy. And you have restrooms there and so forth, and we'll probably, if people, they could come in and use town hall for the restroom here if they need it,
Alright.
or we'll put porta johns out there. So, yeah.
So can you explain to me again what the parking situation is gonna be over there? So I know we're gonna use the south end of Town Hall, but also,
It's a little bit to be determined. And this is just me thinking, I haven't really brainstormed with Parks and Rec staff how they
Yeah.
want to do it. And we can get public, a lot of people can help sign this thing, weigh in on it, Public Works, police, public. But, at first I was thinking, like we cone off Howard Gap Road so that nobody can come in when it's going on. But I think that's gonna be problematic, because we still have Public Works coming in.
Right.
Yeah, they're typically done about 3:30 in the day.
so it'll be right, yeah.
Plus, if we cone it off all the way to the road when it's going on, we've eliminated any access in there.
Sure.
And
That in.
it may be good to just bring it in and cone it off maybe near where the vendor, at the edge of the vendor area, so that cars don't go through there, but then you could have people parking there. So
Do
that-
some kind of no-through traffic
Yeah.
event in progress.
I'll say,
Yeah.
what we need,
And-
do you think we
Yeah,
need
something like that, and they, we can take advantage of some parking into the site without completely cutting off, Howard Gap entrance, which is Parish Municipal Road. And then, but the green, so our little path here going into the area, where we're talking about, where the vendors are gonna be, well, we have to close the gate here. There's just too many people who cut through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they come barreling down there, it is not safe for them to
Absolutely.
come and trying to scoot around
Yeah.
and get cute. Yeah, it's,
Do you think we'll need any, police enforcement at the Howard Gap?
we might
Portion of it.
initially. I don't think we will. I don't think it's like we're gonna have a torrent of people coming in. The biggest thing would be some caution to the folks coming in, trying to cut through. But they'll see pretty quickly, you can't get through, and then go back.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was my biggest concern with this. I like this site, it's not that big, but, it's paved already, it's easy to get to, it's pretty visible, the park's great, but we need to do it in the back parking lot,
Yeah.
which gets it a little bit more removed from the kind of the visibility thing. But, so.
And I think
that's
both
our
sites
thoughts.
work well and both have challenges. so-
Yeah,
They do.
yeah, true.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. That's good. So, I'll just keep this on here and then go through it quickly and then see, if that's okay, what Trevor and Keith, if they have anything more on this.
Yep, sounds good. Any more on that item? Moving on to the discussion of the lease agreement and approval of resolution for concession stand operations, and this is Babels again, right?
Yeah, and this can go to
Consent.
consent,
Good,
but
yeah.
I just wanted to, Roy Dickerson, Babel's Ice Cream, he's been,
Good guy.
yeah, he's been leasing the concession stand. I think this is the fourth year maybe we're coming up on. And it's worked well. We used to have town staff, operated over there. And it was just not the most efficient way to do that, or very effective, really. So Roy's well set up for that, or Babel's Ice Cream. Basically same time frame, April 15th. He normally was beginning of April to the end of August, but he was saying like April 15th to August 15th. I mean, we could extend it if we needed to, but same rent at $450 a month, and that's essentially it. And they're getting close on the concession building to having that ready,
Oh, that'd
so.
be my next question.
That's the next,
There you go.
yeah,
Yep.
because there's some new cabinetry that's gotta go in there, and they've cleaned it up.
They have to do much wiring in it? You're doing it well?
Some, not a lot. We had a little like server room back there for the security cameras.
Yeah.
It has power. That's one of our few places that has
Mhm.
power, I think the only one. So, yeah, when I talk about next item, that's still, all the power panel boxes aren't fixed in the
Fixed,
park
that's what
yet,
it's-
so we gotta bid that.
Well, this is pretty straightforward. Can we just move it to consent?
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody?
I'm good with
All
that.
right.
If that's okay with y'all,
Yeah,
yeah.
no.
And I just, I don't know, I kept it on, there's a couple little things changed with them, and,
Nothing major?
no.
Okay. Sounds good. Do we have any other questions, comments there? All right, let's move on to Tropical Storm Helene recovery, Mr. Manager.
Okay, so, I mean, as you know, the focus of our work has been Gilmore Community Park and all the repairs. We just had our special call meeting for the second bidding we did for the majority of the work that needs to be done out there. So that's, all the fencing on the ball fields, the fencing and some court repair to our multi-use court, so the pickleball, tennis court, basketball court. And then the dog park had the small dog side, small dog breed, weight side. The fence was down on that. It was the second half of it. So, that's about to begin, and, the backstops and the things we're trying to get done first, get that going because of baseball starting soon. So I talked to Ben Cathy, McGill Associates, and we're trying to get the contract done, or just executed formally. They're getting their bonds together. They've submitted a submittal sheet for the fencing, and so they're looking at that. They should be ordering materials here. So that's moving along, and I hope to have a better timeline on how that's progressing once the contract's executed. We'll do a pre-construction conference with the contractor and the engineer, so we get into a little bit more logistics on things like that. So that's moving forward, that's good. The other things that still need to be done there is, we were just talking about the electrical panels, so all the electrical stuff has to be bid out, there's a bunch of them. The stream bank repair, in particular, the section down near Mills Gap Road, the bridge there. And then we have a section in the main part of the park that needs to be done. And then the bridge, that's one, obviously a lot of people are chomping at the bit to get that done, because we miss across the creek there and use the rest of the Greenway Trail. So, we're working with McGill on all those things to get bid specs together. We're trying to push that along, because I know we were shooting for spring, summer, hopefully to get that
Are the
bid
panels
and
going to affect
started.
the use of the lighting
Pardon
in
me?
ball fields?
What about the
The panel
Yes.
upgrades and repairs, is
Uh-huh.
that going to affect the lighting for the kids
It
down at the
should.
ball field?
It shouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, the lighting should be the same once the
Okay, I
panels
didn't know
are
if it
done.
was
Yeah.
operational and they're good to go when they're ready to get on the field, or?
Yeah, as long as,
Okay.
as long as the panels are done. And
Okay.
that's a good question, yeah, because we do need to coordinate that for any of the night stuff for our
Guess I
lights
never
for
play
Field
in
5. They don't do a lot on Field 5, so
Mm.
that's the good thing.
I think time
But-
changes this coming
Yeah.
Saturday,
Yeah.
so they'll get,
Yeah,
More
that'll help,
hours,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so those things are all still to be bid and done out there, and we're trying to move that along. McGill's working on that, and so that's kind of the status of repairs there. The other thing I was gonna talk to you about relative to storm response here is the debris removal. And, earlier last month, you gave the green light to Public Works to start helping with the brush removal or vegetative debris, they call it. And they've hit the ground running. I mean, they have 271 loads, like
That's awesome.
22,000 cubic yards. They're thinking maybe the end of this week that they've basically made their run all through town. So, you should see a big difference of brush piles gone. The only thing they don't have the capability to do is the really big stuff, like, so some of the big tree logs or
Which
trees.
evidently SDR went through St. John's Road because
Uh-huh.
all the large
Uh-huh.
sections of logs that,
Yeah.
from some of Key,
Uh-huh.
all that's gone now.
Good, that's
So
great, that's good
a
to hear.
thing.
Good, good. So they can't do that or the big stumps. But other than that, they're hitting the brush, and it's a good system. Public Works picked it up, they bring it over here by the, that staging area on that kind of east side of the green building, and, or west side, and, SDR then comes and gets it and takes it to the, wherever they're staging it, or chipping it up. So that's worked really well, and so that's nearly done. I don't know if we want to talk about it tonight or at some point in the future, but and this is just some conversation I've had with our Public Works Director, with Jabo, about this, is I don't know if the C and D, so the construction demolition debris, which would be your drywall, just miscellaneous kind of junk that's been brought out of a house or a business, do we help with that? There's about 63 sites they counted a week or two ago,
Yeah.
of C and D, from little stuff to big stuff. I don't know if you want to go there because it's that's a little more complicated,
Contamination.
because
I was talking, that's what's it take?
yeah, it's
Do it
not
there.
that
Yeah.
clean. You know, brush is fairly clean, you know,
Mhm.
they pick it up, they put it in there, you know, it's brush and, you know, vegetation. When you get into C and D stuff, the construction, demolition, there could be all kinds of miscellaneous things
There
in
you go.
there. And if we handle it, are we handling it and taking it right to the landfill, the transfer station, and then we got to pay the tipping fee on it? Or do we stage it somewhere like, which I don't know if that's the best idea, on the other side of the green maintenance building, and then SDR comes and picks it up? I don't know. I'm just trying to, we're just trying to be proactive here, or just trying to help move this along for.
I think as much as I want to try and
help.
help, I think there's a lot of unknowns with the C and D stuff that
Yeah.
I don't know we want to.
Yeah. I'm a little hesitant, but then, I don't know, I'm sure it is for y'all, but it's frustrating to see it sitting out
Yeah.
there for so, see
I mean,
the
if they're-
same
I
pile.
know I've
Yeah.
asked this question, but
That you've looked at for how many months now, and you're
Yes.
like,
have we gotten a
Little-
timeline on the C and D stuff at all?
you know, and that's been,
I don't think they have a system, honestly.
Well, I mean,
'Cause they
it's-
kind of jump.
we've had a really difficult time trying to ascertain what that is. And we've tried to, patiently communicate with, our point of contact with the county and then to their contractor, but it's,
Frustrating.
yeah, and maybe it's time if we can get some more helpful information or some helpful information to meet with, the municipal managers, county manager, and the county engineer, just to, hey, how's it going? Is there anything we can do to help?
Yeah.
Is there any more information you could tell us about how this is being organized, so we can communicate it better to our public? Should they keep doing the online thing to let them know? Yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
just because,
I know,
What-
like South Chase, some of the last couple of houses they went and got dumpsters this week
did they?
and have
Yeah.
started
Yeah.
loading for pickup
Yeah.
because they're tired of waiting.
We see
Yeah,
not-
I mean,
not
if it
kind-
was me,
Yeah.
that was my house, and I could.
But there's a
I
cost
could-
associated
Right,
with
See, and that's why I
and
hate
I'm
that for our
comfortable
residents.
with
I do
the
too.
board
that.
meeting
I
that
know.
cost.
It's not
I would
fair.
do it
Because they're already
myself.
paying
I
for it
would
with the
anyway.
taxes. And so
Yeah.
I hate that they have to pay to get a dumpster out there to clean up the things when we're supposed to, or the county, whoever, is supposed to be getting it up anyways.
Yeah.
And so, that's why I'm kind of in between here. If there's a safe, effective, and big on safe and cost-effective way that maybe we can help then maybe we should do that, but I think we don't need to make that decision until we get more information from the county about what the process actually looks like.
Yeah.
And what's going on in their end, because it's
What are the
confusing.
hazards? What have they seen
Unless-
so far?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
again, big on safety,
Yeah. So,
because that's just not fair, that they have to pay to get a dumpster to get that stuff
I
up.
agree.
yeah, I'll see if I can facilitate something with them. Maybe it's time to do that, how this is happening. Okay. And then the only other thing I was gonna mention under that is, we got our first reimbursement. It's in the report.
I saw that,
So, yeah,
yeah.
so some money has actually, and this is not a criticism of FEMA, I'm just sharing, because a lot of money's been approved and a lot of money has been dispersed places, but this is our first actual funds that we've come into our account here for this, or a check. And it was for some of the trail repair and then mulch at the playground, because that got all washed out. And that's not just regular mulch, it's this high-end special stuff they put in there, yeah.
So how long did it take us to get this reimbursement?
2 to 3 months, something like that. They've given information and kind of the life cycle from setting it up to doing it, completing the work, to
Yeah.
getting reimbursed, and,
Is that the
I'd say we've
standard?
done a good
Yeah.
job when we have things about 95% well set up in FEMA's system that we need to put it in so
Yeah.
that they can ultimately reimburse us as the work's completed. But we've had FEMA inspectors out, they were out last week, and that's kind of various levels of how that goes. This last week was a little more cumbersome out there with them than the prior visit or visits, so.
I mean, I'm not stressing, 2 months payment, as long as it doesn't put us in a pickle or anything, it's fine.
Yeah, and just,
I was just
so you
kind of
know,
curious that it
yeah,
wasn't gonna
we're-
end up
we're-
being pushed out months or even years later.
We can handle it from a cash flow standpoint, as that has not become a hardship, so
Right,
that's
yeah.
good. And as long as, ultimately the reimbursement comes in, we won't, the net on this, we won't have too big of a hit as far as out-of-pocket fund balance,
Right,
that kind of
yeah,
thing.
very healthy.
So right now, we're in good shape. I was gonna mention something else, just came to mind on that, and it's gone. But now, I mean, we've got it set up, they've been doing the inspections, and as we just continue to complete the work, we should get our reimbursements on it, so.
Good.
Yeah, and it was 36,000 that had just come in. It wasn't a big amount, but,
I read-
starting to happen.
I rode
Yeah.
through the industrial park Saturday,
Yeah,
all the way back.
yeah,
And I don't know if they've put paint on the buildings or clean back in there, some of those blue metal buildings. And I was amazed at how much of the C&D stuff from over there has already.
good, yeah.
Oh, that is good.
I have not, but I've seen some emails from the point of contact for Fletcher Business Park, which is Pulliam, to the county, and it was down to like 25%.
Yeah, there's not much,
Yeah.
there's not much on the
Yeah.
ground out there now at all.
Yeah, and they were just trying to kind of get it finished up.
That's
But
good.
That's good.
That is
Yeah,
good.
I'm glad to see that progress, because
Yeah.
that was a mess.
Mess.
It was monumental amount of material out there,
Yeah.
which just shows you how big of an undertaking, how expensive this is in the end. And I don't know if you all saw the article from the county, they had a big report, and just how much debris has been removed, how much expense, and how much is coming in the door. Oh, the last thing I was gonna mention is, there's been some reports about loans to local governments. We're not receiving a loan. it's been made available, but we turned it down. It was like 100, I think 60 some. I don't quote
If we
me on
don't,
the exact
if we don't need to,
number.
let's not,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't need to, let's not.
163, I think Christine was saying 163. So we've responded that, thank you, but, we're able to balance this right now
Good.
without having to. Because, it's a loan, you're going to pay it back.
Yeah. Sure.
It's just another, quite frankly, logistical thing we don't need to be dealing with,
Yeah.
thankfully, so. So that's all I had on that, unless there's any questions.
Questions?
Thank you.
All right, yeah, moving to your town manager's report.
Okay. So the work that McGill is doing, that kind of engineering analysis on our town center property, I mentioned sometime back that they submitted an updated wetlands delineation, so where our wetlands are on the town center property. They submitted it to the Corps. The Corps Army Corps of Engineers, that's the agency that does that. It just came back, their determination. I forwarded it to McGill to see, does that line up exactly with what you guys determined? I don't think it does exactly, but and do we need to appeal it or? So that's where that's at. And then, once we kind of have a final word on it, we can go over and show you that on a map.
Yeah.
I've shared with you before the map that McGill submitted to the Army Corps after they did their analysis on it. And then the other thing is, on this project, McGill was looking at permitting options, like with the Army Corps of Engineers, if you did fill and certain types of development where wetlands are impacted, and they had a couple different scenarios, and I think Ben Cathy was trying to finalize that, and Scott in their office to, and then present that to you all or share that. So hoping future meeting, maybe April, I have to see how they're doing with that to update you all. But I want to get them back to talk about it so you can get some idea. The next thing I was going to mention, kind of it's related to town center. So our retail strategies consultant, they're continuing to get the word out about our project to some other developer contacts they've had. I had a conference call with a group called Kimley Horn and the other LDG. Kimley Horn's done mixed-use developments. They're out of Raleigh. LDG has done, they're predominantly a housing developer in workforce, affordable housing projects, fairly big. They've done a lot across a lot of places. So I had a conference call with a whole bunch of people last week, and so they're going to look at our site. I did say, there's some mixed concerns about how much workforce housing, affordable housing on council. There's some interest, but we don't want it to be predominantly that. And the other thing was, we've got to have commercial elements to this. I mean, this has to be a mixed-use development and not a primarily residential development. So, the one firm, LDG, that the housing is just what they do, really. So I kind of kicked it back to them, and they're going to look at it. LDG's doing a project up in, I do have it here somewhere. They're doing a project in Weaverville. They're about to break ground, so I was going to get some more information about that. But anyways, they're going to go back and look at our site and maybe crunch some numbers or look at it. But Weaverville they're getting ready to start in Weaverville on something called Maribel, project called Maribel. But they've worked in Buncombe County and
So they don't have any commercial experience, is what I'm hearing?
I don't think they do commercial. They may have had some partners that have done commercial and stuff, but not them. That's why I was hoping to get the other firm, Kimley Horn, a little bit more. So I'm going to reach back out to Kimley Horn, and they had another developer that, it's one with capacity that has done other mixed-use development in several states, and they're based out of North Carolina. They kind of backed off a little bit because they've got so many projects going on right now. So, but anyways, that happened last week, and they're continuing to push. And they're using the example of our prior developer, how the buildings were laid out, you know, with Lewis Real Estate Group and the Waddells and WBLA Engineering on the prior concept plan on Highway 25, that piece. So that's what they're kind of showing, to give some perspective of what would be palatable to the town, possible, yeah. The next thing I was going to talk to you about, and this will ultimately probably become a separate agenda item at a future meeting, is parking enforcement in town. I know you all got an email recently from a
Yeah.
resident in Stafford Crossing, which is off of Rutledge Road, and about, I guess, the town helping with parking enforcement. When you say the town, really ultimately becomes police department. We don't have a parking enforcement division of our police department, just not that big, and haven't had the need for it, quite frankly. How we've kind of handled this in subdivisions, there's usually not a lot of parking enforcement. I mean, when you look at parking enforcement in cities, it's generally in a more condensed commercial, like a downtown area that's got mixed-use development, not so much in a subdivision. The way we've kind of handled this is, yes, some of our subdivisions have a little bit more specific parking restrictions, where they put signage up, and we've, you know, the police have been out maybe to have someone move a car, but the way we're set up right now, they can't just simply put a ticket on a vehicle. The way our citations work is they have to find the driver of the vehicle, and it's a little bit strict, the citation. I mean, it could be up to a Class 3 misdemeanor, which is excessive for a parking violation.
Yeah.
And they're not out there writing a bunch of things like that. It's just not wise. So the chief did a memo kind of just responding to this, and if y'all want us to do it, I'd probably recommend that we do look further into if we set up a mechanism for like a lighter infraction where, you know, there is a ticket left on a car, and then, you know, where does the money go? What happens if they don't pay it? And like the next steps, court enforcement, things like that. It almost like a civil penalty
That's what I was
level of how it
thinking.
would start out. But we need to put something together. Probably would require a new ordinance or tweaks to our existing ordinance that cover anything parking enforcement related. So it's a lot more involved. I don't know how much they'd be out there actually writing tickets. This is primarily in our subdivision type areas, and there's not a lot of parking enforcement that's needed. There's more like parking conflict, more among neighbors type thing, so.
Would our officers even have, say if we did come up with some kind of ticketing process, would they even have capacity to go around and enforce this anyways in
Well-
subdivisions? I mean, what,
Yeah, if we put this together, yeah, as long as it's clear that that's a violation. You know, it's like marked on the street, and we know
Yeah.
they're not supposed to be parking there. I don't think you'd see a lot of tickets being issued out there. I don't think it'd be a thing where police are constantly out there looking, and it'd be
No,
probably a
I
little
hope
bit
not.
more complaint driven, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, good.
And, you know, I don't think at this point it's gonna take like more staff to handle it, unless
Yeah.
it was a constant thing, like, a downtown area where
Yeah.
we need to be vigilant to
Okay, good.
regular enforcement, regular ticketing, so that people are moving out of those spots where
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
not supposed to be in. I don't envision it
Yeah,
being.
I think it can
Complaint-
become a retaliatory thing if we're not careful.
Yeah, I would say complaint-driven makes a lot of sense. I would prefer that than driving around and seeing a car and like
And a
ticket.
parking
I
ticket.
think
Right.
that's,
Yeah.
I think that creates a horrible reputation for the
Yeah.
police department too.
Yeah, and they're reluctant to go in there and just do that because, I mean, some of it is, obviously, they have some higher priority things with
Yeah.
responding to
Time.
calls,
Yeah.
moving violation, traffic enforcement, other things like that. And the other side of it is, do you want to go be, punishing someone who just had their car right there, and it might have been there for an hour,
Slippery slope.
So, and that's why we haven't really needed to do this to this point, but maybe we need to get in. The hard part has been in the past with this, is we don't have an easier, clear-cut mechanism, like, okay, do we tweak our ordinances and have a different ticket and a different, where does the money go, all that stuff, and appealing it and so forth. So maybe the time's coming to do this, maybe not. You don't have to do this, but
Yeah.
that's why we can, Chief and I can dig further into this and maybe make this a future agenda item to help you determine, do we want to cross that bridge, or is it time, or?
I think
it's
whoever's
time.
working that district, monitor that. I know there was no markings, now there's markings, now there's signage saying
So that's-
that.
There is some
And so
signage, yeah.
is that mechanism gonna work to where,
Yeah,
we move
right,
on?
and it may
I
take,
would-
Yeah, that's a good point.
it
Yeah,
may take
just
some
some-
time for that to happen, yeah. And, some of this is, if they have a HOA, the HOA gets the
Right.
word out.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how much HOA members go and tell someone to, no one likes to have to tell someone to move their car and avoid the conflict or, fights that,
they are a town
They will
street
now.
crew.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's what I was thinking. They
I'm
will.
not scared of my area.
those are all
They will.
maintained.
Yes.
They'll call you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at with this, and so if you want, we can come back.
I like Jim's suggestion about kind of waiting and see what happens there now they have their new signage. Is that what you're conveying?
Yes, as the guys are
Signage.
patrolling that development, just ask them to keep track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I came through here today at this time and this time. I know it
Yeah.
adds a little work for them,
Yeah.
but just something that we can, stats-driven for
Yeah,
the
yeah, I
police
like that idea.
department to
Yeah.
see, is it
Is it even worth our time?
Is it
going?
working,
Yeah, yeah.
or do we need to take it to a different level?
Yeah, because this might not even be necessary to look into a ticketing.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thought.
But keep in mind, if we come back with a process this would be town-wide.
Right.
And help
Yeah.
in the future, if it's,
Have our
if it's
staff.
happening over in Livingston Farms somewhere, or River Birch, or, the biggest one we've dealt with over the years, and we've re-engineered the traffic flow, and they have signage, was, Towns of Bagwell Mills.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's been one.
Yeah, I can see that.
And we've had to work with the property owners in there and the HOA. And I feel like that, they may still have some issues from time to time. That kind of got corrected by
Yeah.
doing some modifications to restricting parking to one side, or allowing it on one side and making it one way through there.
Yeah.
That helped to alleviate some of the issues they were dealing with.
How many, are you, Mark, or I guess, are there y'all, you guys, Trevor and Keith too? I don't really get that many emails or communications regarding
Parking.
parking. Yeah.
I don't, I hear more about stop sign issues in our development and around the area than I
Yeah.
do about parking
Yeah,
problems.
we don't get a lot of it. Like I said, some of it was a lot of neighborhood conflict that was happening. You know, there was, years ago in Bagwell Mills, there was a lot
Yeah.
of tension.
And I can see that.
And
yeah.
you can see that if you know the roads in
I could
there.
definitely see that.
Either, you know, you got a parking lot, you got driveways, not big driveways,
Mm-hmm.
not a big garage, and a lot of people are storing stuff in the garage, they're putting the car in the garage, and then, you know, maybe the two vehicles, let's just say they own, they were both in the driveway, and it just further reduces your
Mm-hmm.
number of places to park.
Well, if you've got a family
And-
living in one of those and mom and dad drive and they have kids that
Yeah.
drive, you all of a sudden
I
morph
mean-
into 4 cars with a 2-car.
I just don't, I don't understand the infrastructure.
I don't
It makes
We're-
zero sense
Well,
to me, but.
and we've had, there's been changes to some of our land development code as
Since
a
then.
result of what happened over there, where we.
It's just
made some
unimaginable
roadway
to
things.
sometimes drive through there. It just doesn't make sense.
So, yeah, so we had a lot of resident conflict in there, and so kind of police, public works, myself, others trying to, we made some improvements to the roadway and parking allowances, traffic direction that helped to alleviate that. But no, we don't get a lot from, you know, some of it's self-enforcement in the neighborhood, and
Is chief or somebody in PD, or do they interact with the HOAs when we get complaints or
Yeah.
anything? I mean, are
Yeah.
they going out and doing any kind of education or, giving them advice or anything of that
they'll
nature?
go out and talk to them, or the officer goes out and talks based on a call. But, I mean, they've spoken at HOA meetings, chief or other,
Yeah.
I think it's usually the chief, but other police staff that have gone to an HOA meeting and try and answer some of these questions or give advice.
Yeah.
So there's been some of that.
Okay, that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And that's, the last thing I had on there, I didn't mention it. It's in your packet outline on the second page, and, you know, like upcoming meetings or events. But next month, we'll have the shred event. I think we told you maybe sometime back, we had scheduled it
Right into
for.
the egg hunt.
Yeah, it's the same day as the
Oh,
egg
wow.
hunt.
Go from one to the next.
Yeah, get here early if you have to take kiddos over there to that.
Man.
Well, it's over by noon here anyways, but
Yeah.
I don't think it'll, with traffic, because they come in and
They
out of
just
here.
do a circle around.
Yeah, yeah,
There'll be
so-
medication
Yeah.
dropped too.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
pretty
smooth.
edited
I'll be here
that on
now.
the other one.
Yeah, so pill drop and the shred event on April the 12th. April the 12th, that's a Saturday, 9 to noon, so that's all I had.
Any questions for Mark? Comments? Nope. Mark, I will say you left one thing off.
Oh,
Mark-
smell it.
Yeah, Mark Hather, Eric and I came in second to last in the.
Purposely left that.
Yeah, and the Smart Start Partnership for Children spelling bee, and I'll say there's one common denominator here, and it's me. They weren't on my team last year, but last year I came in last place. This year I came in second to last. So maybe I'm the issue here, but
You
I don't
know,
know.
participating, this is my first time in this, you know, a 4-person team's almost kind of a big team.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because realistically, when you're doing this, one person's writing it, and there's one person in their ear next to them, and there's really kind of 2 people doing this, and I think you and I were the more, yeah, that looks right, or not really telling
Yeah.
them that,
I don't know.
I almost think these 2-person teams might
Yeah,
be more
might work
efficient than 4. But it was good turnout. There was a lot of people there. We had a good time.
Yeah,
And they, I think, netted 12,000.
something else.
That-
great.
Well,
Yeah, really good. Yeah. Very
Well,
good.
they should have, because we had to buy back in 3 times because we got out.
Oh,
But
yeah.
three Nevertheless, any other business from council?
That was an expensive night, but for a good cause.
Yeah.
That's all.
All
Yeah.
right, any other business?
Nope.
All right, you got a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
All right,
Second.
all right, motion and second, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We are adjourned. I like to say I'm probably gonna retire from the spelling bee, but I know they'll reach out to me and I'll be back again